What if the woman who helped shape the tribes of Israel was an Egyptian, a daughter of idols, a priest's child? What if the mother of Manasseh and Ephraim, the great tribes of Israel, was a foreigner? Would you still believe God writes with unexpected hands? If this story shakes what you thought you knew, then stay with us. Because today, we're uncovering one of the Bible's most mysterious and powerful women, Asenath, the forgotten queen beside Joseph. And if you love discovering the hidden voices of the Bible, stories of redemption, faith, and the women history tried to silence, then don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Women in the Bible, and drop a comment below about what moves you most in Asenath's journey. Let's begin. You know Joseph, the dreamer, the prisoner turned prince, the Hebrew slave who wore a coat of many colors and later the robes of Egyptian royalty. He was betrayed by his brothers, thrown into a pit, sold into slavery, falsely accused, and locked in prison. And yet somehow he rose to become second in command to Pharaoh, ruling over the greatest empire on earth. You know Joseph. But do you know her? The woman who stood beside him, the one who was given to him by Pharaoh, the one who bore the sons who became the two great tribes of Israel. Her name was Asenath, an Egyptian noblewoman, the daughter of Potiphar, high priest of On, the spiritual capital of ancient Egypt. She was born into temples of gold, surrounded by the worship of Ra, the sun god, and Neith, the goddess of war and wisdom. Her name itself meant belonging to Neith. To the world she was untouchable, aristocracy, sacred, chosen by the gods of Egypt. But to heaven, she was chosen for something even greater. Let's set the scene. The Empire of Egypt, at the height of its glory, was a land of towering pyramids and sprawling temples. Priests governed not only religion, but science, astronomy, and law. The city of On, or Heliopolis, was the crown jewel, the religious and intellectual hub of the ancient world. Asenath lived here, in splendor. Her childhood was shaped by rituals, offerings to idols, chants in temple courts, and processions honoring sun deities. She wore linen woven in gold, walked among papyrus gardens, and was destined for influence, but not the kind she expected. Then came Joseph, the Hebrew slave who, in one day, went from chains to command. Pharaoh had a dream, a vision no one in the empire could interpret. His magicians failed, his priests fumbled. Then came the report, a Hebrew in prison who could read dreams. Joseph stood before Pharaoh not as a man seeking favor, but as a servant of the living God. "I cannot do it," Joseph said, "but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires." Genesis 41:16. Pharaoh's dream was dire, 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of famine. Joseph didn't just interpret, he strategized. He saved an empire before it even fell. And Pharaoh knew. "There is no one like you, a man in whom is the Spirit of God." He placed his signet ring on Joseph's hand, dressed him in royal robes, gave him a chariot, and made him second in command. But he also gave Joseph something else. A wife, not just any wife, Asenath, daughter of Potiphar, priest of On. Let's pause here. Why would Pharaoh, king of Egypt, give his royal Hebrew advisor the daughter of a priest? This was more than marriage. It was politics. It was a merger. It was Pharaoh ensuring Joseph was not just a ruler, but integrated into the very soul of Egyptian nobility. But what about her? Asenath wasn't just a prize. She was a person, a woman raised to believe in gods of the sun and moon. She grew up believing she was sacred, chosen by Ra, surrounded by rituals older than any empire. And now she's being given to a Hebrew, to a man who speaks of one invisible God, who eats differently, prays differently, and worships without idols. What was going through her mind? Was it confusion, disgust, curiosity? Was there something in his eyes, something unfamiliar, yet true? According to an ancient apocryphal text, Joseph and Asenath, her journey was far deeper than marriage. It was a transformation. She wasn't drawn to Joseph's power. She was drawn to his purity, to his truth, to the God he served. And what did she do? She left the palace. She entered solitude. She fasted for 7 days. She wept. She broke her idols. She rejected the gods of her fathers, and she prayed him for the first time, not to Ra or Isis or Neith, but to the God of Israel. "Be strong, Asenath," said the angel who appeared to her. "Your prayers have been heard. You are no longer a stranger, but a daughter of the Most High." When Joseph saw her again, he knew. "Now I know you are mine," he said, "for the God of my fathers has also chosen you." And that is only the beginning. What do you think was going through Asenath's heart as she let go of everything she'd known? Her gods, her rituals, her name. Can you imagine walking away from centuries of tradition because something inside you whispered truth? Comment below. What would you have done in her place? And stay with us, because in part 2, we'll explore the next chapter. How Asenath became the mother of nations and how her children would change Israel's future forever. If this story is stirring something in you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because at Women in the Bible, we're restoring every silenced voice to its rightful place in history. The palaces of Egypt were built to last forever. Walls of sandstone, pillars carved with hieroglyphs, and ceilings painted with stars. But inside those silent halls, something even more eternal was happening. Not an empire, but a legacy. Not long after their union, Asenath gave birth to a son. Joseph looked into his newborn's eyes and named him Manasseh, saying, "God has made me forget all my hardship and all my father's house." Genesis 41-51. Manasseh, a name that means forgetting, was not about erasing pain, but about healing it. The wounds of betrayal, slavery, and exile now met the face of a child, of a future. Then came the second son, Ephraim. "God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction." Genesis 41:52. Fruitful in affliction. Isn't that the paradox of faith? That we bloom in the very soil that once buried us? But don't miss this. These boys, born in Egypt, half Hebrew, half Egyptian, would one day be grafted into the sacred bloodline of Israel. And who raised them? Not just Joseph, who taught them the ways of the God of Abraham, but Asenath, a former daughter of idols, now a mother of covenant. Imagine her walking with Ephraim through the gardens of On, explaining the difference between idols carved from gold and a God who cannot be seen but always hears. Imagine her telling Manasseh bedtime stories of her own transformation, of the day she destroyed her household gods and found peace in a voice that whispered, "You are mine." Years passed. The famine came, just as Joseph had predicted. Egypt was saved. The world came to buy grain. And among those travelers, you were Joseph's brothers. You know that story of reunion, tears, and forgiveness. But fast forward to the end, to an old man on a bed, frail and fading. Jacob, the father of Joseph, the patriarch of Israel, was dying. And Joseph brought his 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, to receive their grandfather's blessing. Jacob looked at them and made a shocking declaration. "These 2 sons of yours are mine. Ephraim and Manasseh shall be mine, just as Reuben and Simeon are." Genesis 48:5. Wait, what? This wasn't tradition. This wasn't law. Jacob was adopting them, elevating them from grandsons to sons, granting them tribal inheritance equal to his own children. But why? Why would he choose to adopt the sons of an Egyptian woman? Because legacy isn't always about blood. It's about covenant. And then Jacob did something even more unexpected. He crossed his arms. Right hand on Ephraim, the younger, left hand on Manasseh, the older. Joseph protested, "No, father, Manasseh is the firstborn." But Jacob, now filled with divine clarity, said, "I know, my son, I know, but his younger brother shall be greater." Genesis 48:19. And so it was. From those two sons, born of Joseph and Asenath, came two tribes of Israel, not just any tribes. Ephraim, the younger, would rise to lead the northern kingdom of Israel. His name would become a symbol of Israel itself, and Manasseh would inherit vast territories across the Jordan, birthing warriors and judges. Through them, Asenath became not just the wife of Joseph, but a matriarch of Israel. Think about it. A woman born in temples of Ra, raised in a religion of rituals and idols, now mothered two tribes that carried the promise of Abraham. She wasn't just included, she was central to God's unfolding plan. But her story, like so many women's stories, nearly vanished into the margins. She's barely mentioned in sermons, often reduced to a footnote. But her legacy, her impact, it is carved into the heart of Israel. Now imagine this. In every gathering of the 12 tribes, in every war council, harvest, and census, her sons were there, and with them, a piece of her, the woman who crossed worlds, who left behind gods of stone to embrace the unseen God of Israel, who raised leaders, who shaped destiny, all without ever stepping into the spotlight. Let's stop here and ask, what would it take for you to walk away from everything you've known, just to follow truth? Could you surrender your past? Could you unlearn your gods? Drop your answer in the comments, because part 3 is coming, where we'll explore the deeper mystery. What if Asenath wasn't fully Egyptian at all? What if she was more Hebrew than anyone realized? A lost daughter, redeemed in the arms of prophecy. We've seen Asenath as a noble. We've seen her as a convert, a mother, and a matriarch. But what if she was also a lost daughter of Israel? There's an ancient whisper, a tradition passed down in Jewish midrash, that says Asenath wasn't just an Egyptian priest's daughter, she was the child of trauma. She may have been born from violence. Let's rewind to Genesis 34. Jacob had one daughter, Dinah. The story is hard to read. Dinah, while visiting the city of Shechem, was taken and violated by the local prince. What happened next was war, blood, shame, and silence. The Bible never says whether Dinah had a child, but some ancient rabbis believed she did. And that child? Asenath, sent away in shame, raised far from her mother, adopted into an Egyptian household, raised by a priest, never knowing her true bloodline. And one day, without knowing it, she married her uncle, Joseph. It sounds almost impossible, almost scandalous, but the Bible is full of these twists, where brokenness births destiny, where the past is redeemed not with denial, but with restoration. If this version is true, then Asenath's story becomes even more powerful, because she didn't just join Israel through marriage or conversion, she came home. What began as trauma became triumph. A child born of violence became a mother of tribes. A girl abandoned became a chosen queen. A secret shamed became a blessing honored. And even if this tradition isn't confirmed in Scripture, the spiritual truth still rings loud. God sees the hidden ones. He sees the ones left behind, the ones whose stories begin in pain, the ones the world discards, forgets, or shames. And He doesn't just rescue them, He raises them up. He calls them by name. He puts crowns on their heads. He gives them nations to lead. In Christian tradition, Asenath came to be seen as a symbol, a prophetic picture of the church, once an outsider, once steeped in idols, now grafted into the family of God. She was a Gentile bride who married into the covenant, just as the church, made up of all nations, is brought into the promises made to Israel. Paul would later write, "You who were once far off have been brought near by the blood of Christ." Ephesians 2:13. Asenath is that truth. In flesh and story, she is every soul who has felt unworthy, every person who thought they didn't belong, every outsider who thought, God could never use me. And yet, here she is, raising two tribes, written into the destiny of God's people. Let's pause again. What part of Asenath's story mirrors your own? Have you ever felt too far, too broken, too other to belong? Tell us in the comments, because your story might be the encouragement someone else needs right now. You see, Asenath's story didn't end when she bore Ephraim and Manasseh. It didn't end when Jacob crossed his arms and gave the younger the greater blessing. It was just beginning. Because what Asenath passed on was more than blood. It was legacy. The name Ephraim would become far more than a tribal identity. Over time, it would grow to represent the entire northern kingdom of Israel. The prophets, the poets, the kings of that land would all be described, not as Israelites, but as Ephraim. And who was the mother of Ephraim? A woman who once worshipped Ra, who once bowed before sun gods, now had sons who would lead God's chosen people. And her other son, Manasseh, he would inherit lands beyond the Jordan, bold, expansive, warrior-rich territories. The tribe of Manasseh would be known for strength, leadership, and strategy. Asenath's blood flowed through them both, her courage, her clarity, her conversion. But what makes Asenath's legacy so remarkable is not just the territories her sons ruled. It's the spiritual territories she conquered. She crossed the greatest divide imaginable, not from palace to poverty, but from paganism to promise, from temples of stone to a faith built on spirit and truth, from an elite class that bowed to idols, to a lineage that bowed to the one true God. Imagine her, standing behind Joseph as he instructed Pharaoh's court, wearing linen robes, yes, but now with a Torah scroll in her hand, whispering prayers not to Isis, but to El Shaddai. Imagine her raising Ephraim and Manasseh in the palace, but teaching them Hebrew words, telling them bedtime stories not of sun gods, but of Abraham and Isaac. This was her legacy, a transformed heart, shaping a transformed nation. And what about the women of today? What about you? What legacy are you building? Are you, like Asenath, caught between where you came from and where you're called to go? Are you raising children, biological or spiritual, in a world that often worships status, image, and wealth? Are you teaching truth in a palace that still bows to golden idols? Let's be real. This world isn't so different from ancient Egypt. We live among systems of power, influence, seduction, and control. We're surrounded by modern idols, success, fame, and security. And yet, you can be like Asenath. You can stand in that palace, whisper prayers to the unseen God, and raise a legacy that will outlive empires. Question for you. What do you want your spiritual legacy to be? What story are you writing for the generations after you? Share your thoughts in the comments. Someone else needs your courage right now. What if Asenath's story was more than just personal? What if it was prophetic? What if her journey from pagan priesthood to covenant motherhood was a foreshadowing of something much bigger? Because her life is a picture of the gospel itself. Asenath was a foreigner. She was unclean according to Hebrew standards. She was raised among idols, shaped by a culture that worshiped creation rather than the Creator. She wasn't part of the promise. She didn't belong in the family of Abraham. And yet, she was chosen. She was loved. She was brought in. She was grafted into the covenant, just like the church would one day be. Centuries later, the Apostle Paul would write, "You who were once far off have been brought near by the blood of Christ." Ephesians 2:13. That's Asenath's story, and that's our story too. Just like her, We were born outside the promise, born into sin, into idols of self, success, and image. But God, in His mercy, looked at us, not with wrath, but with invitation. And when we said yes, when we repented, when we turned, He didn't just forgive, He adopted us. He gave us a name, a new lineage, a legacy, just like He did for Asenath. Let's go even deeper. The wedding of Joseph and Asenath mirrors another wedding, one that's still coming. In Revelation, we're told about the marriage supper of the Lamb, a time when Christ, the greater Joseph, will be united with His bride, the church. Not because we were perfect, not because we were born righteous, but because He made us clean. Because like Asenath, we said, "Your God will be my God." And heaven responded, "You are no longer a stranger, but a daughter of the Most High." So what does Asenath mean for you today? It means your past doesn't disqualify you. It means your outsider status is not a barrier. It might just be the setup for your greatest calling. It means that women who were once forgotten become mothers of nations. It means that God doesn't need perfect vessels. He just needs willing ones. Let's reflect. Have you ever felt like Asenath? Like you didn't belong? Like your background was too broken, too different, too distant from what God could use? Tell us in the comments. How has God redeemed your story like He did for hers? If this story moved you, if it opened your eyes to a woman you never saw before, then don't let it end here. Share this with someone who feels like an outsider. Subscribe to Women in the Bible, where lost voices come back to life. Like this video, drop a comment, and let us know what woman of the Bible you want to discover next. Because if God could choose Asenath, a forgotten Egyptian girl, a former idol worshiper, a silent queen behind a Hebrew prince, then He can choose you too. You were made for such a time as this.